Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe is truly fascinating, but it also raises many questions. On one hand, it's an amazing world full of magic and adventures. On the other, it's a web of illogicalities and plot holes, especially in areas where logic and rules should take precedence. One such issue is the Ministry of Magic and its complete disregard for numerous matters that, ideally, it should be strictly controlling. Let's take a closer look at a few of these moments. Number one, transfiguration of animals. I can't help but mention an important point that might have passed unnoticed by many readers. In Chamber of Secrets, Professor McGonagall teaches students the Ferroverto spell, turning animals into cups of water. And here we encounter several oddities. First, in practice, not all students were able to perform the spell correctly on the first try, and many only partially transformed the animals. The very idea of turning animals into objects is a form of cruelty. And this is not some unusual spell, but something taught to second-year students at Hogwarts. Yet the Ministry of Magic seems to ignore the problem. Number two, love potions. Wizards have a rather careless attitude toward potions, especially those that can influence emotions. In Half-Blood Prince, we see how Voldemort's mother used a love potion on his father, and later Ron falls under the influence of a potion. This creates many dangerous situations, and it's strange that the Ministry of Magic doesn't regulate this process. In real life, many narcotics and controlled substances are strictly regulated, but here it seems like complete disregard. Number three, potion brewing and distribution. Potions in the Harry Potter world are very powerful and dangerous substances. Some can bring luck, others can transform a person into someone else. The important point here is that the distribution of potions is clearly not controlled properly. If such magic existed in our world, potions would be sold only by prescription to prevent abuse, but in the magical world, it seems this is forgotten. Number four, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Fred and George Weasley are talented inventors, but their shop is a real epicenter of dangerous and sometimes harmful products. Love potions, instant darkness powder, which Malfoy uses. These are just the tip of the iceberg. Many things they sell may seem harmless, but in reality, they can cause a lot of trouble both at Hogwarts and outside of it. Interestingly, the Ministry of Magic does not intervene in such activities. Number five, dark magic artifacts. Dark artifacts like cursed necklaces seem to be strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. Arthur Weasley often conducts raids in search of such items. However, the shop Gorbin and Burke's, which sells dark magic goods, operates freely and thrives. This is yet another example of how the Ministry turns a blind eye to obvious problems it should be controlling. Number six, Owl Post. The magical postal system is, of course, a very unique way of delivering messages, but the problem is that it is absolutely unprotected from interception. In Order of the Phoenix, Dolores Umbridge easily intercepts a letter from Harry, even harming Buckbeak in the process. It is strange that the Ministry of Magic hasn't taken the time to create a more secure postal system, as such things are crucial for safety. Number seven, flying. Brooms are one of the most popular means of transportation in the magical world, especially among students. At Hogwarts, they teach flying, but here's the interesting point. There are no strict restrictions on broom use. This is surprising, as for example, to use apparition, a wizard must be old enough and pass an exam. But there are no such rules for broomsticks, which creates many opportunities for manipulation. Number 8. Unregistered animagi. One of the most mysterious and potentially dangerous abilities in the magical world is the transformation into an animagus. While the Ministry of Magic requires wizards to register as animagi, it clearly fails to regulate the process effectively. The case of the Marauders, Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and James Potter proves this. These 4 students managed to hide their animagus abilities for years without anyone in the Ministry noticing. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, we learn how Sirius, Pettigrew, and James transformed into animals at will with no legal consequences. Sirius even turned into a large black dog and Pettigrew into a rat, but the Ministry remained unaware of their illegal transformations. Perhaps the most dangerous example is Peter Pettigrew. For decades he lived as a rat, unnoticed by both Muggles and wizards, even within the very house of Harry's parents. His time as an animagus allowed him to spy and ultimately play a pivotal role in Voldemort's return. The Ministry, it seems, either didn't care or simply couldn't detect the use of animagic powers. This lack of oversight allowed a criminal like Pettigrew to remain free and wreak havoc. The Ministry's failure to control the use of such a powerful and deceptive ability directly contributed to some of the darkest events in wizarding history. Number 9. Use of time turners. Time turners, introduced in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, are devices that allow wizards to travel through time. The consequences of changing the past are immense. Even a small alteration can have unpredictable, catastrophic effects. Yet the Ministry of Magic allows their use with little regard for these dangers. Hermione Granger, a student, is granted access to a time turner just to attend extra lessons. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she uses it to attend multiple classes at once, a seemingly harmless task. But the potential risks of tampering with time are immense, and allowing a young wizard to control such power seems reckless. The Ministry's handling of the time turner issue raises significant concerns. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the time turners are destroyed during the battle at the Department of Mysteries, highlighting their dangerous nature. But the fact that the Ministry let Hermione use one so casually for trivial purposes is deeply troubling. Quote 2, says Professor McGonagall, yet even with such a powerful and risky artifact, there's no real oversight. This lack of caution and regulation makes the Ministry's approach to magical safety seem dangerously irresponsible. Number 10. Muggle technology integration. The Ministry of Magic often claims that one of its key goals is to protect the magical world from Muggle influence, yet it seems blind to how deeply Muggle technologies and habits have already infiltrated the lives of wizards. Arthur Weasley's enchanted car, for instance, is a perfect example. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, he uses the flying car to transport Harry and Ron to Hogwarts. The car, a Muggle invention made magical, is freely used by wizards without any concern for the dangers it might pose to the secrecy of the magical world. Then there's the use of Muggle radios. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the members of the Order of the Phoenix use Muggle radios to communicate secretly. Despite the Ministry's constant rhetoric about keeping magic hidden from Muggles, it seems to have no issue with wizards using Muggle technology in their everyday lives. These radios, used to transmit secret messages, are a direct breach of the Ministry's stated concerns about maintaining the secrecy of the magical community. And yet the Ministry ignores this contradiction. If the Ministry is truly concerned with protecting the magical world from exposure, Why does it allow wizards to so easily adopt Muggle inventions? The use of Muggle technology by wizards only increases the risk of magical secrets being discovered. In doing nothing to regulate this, the Ministry is not protecting the magic it swears to defend, but is instead opening the door to potential chaos. It's a glaring oversight in the Ministry's supposed safeguards. Number 11. House Elf Rights. House elves are one of the darkest aspects of the magical world. These creatures have been enslaved for centuries, bound by powerful enchantments to serve their masters without question. They are completely dependent on the wizards who own them, and yet the Ministry of Magic does nothing to address this widespread injustice. The laws that govern magical beings seem to forget the house elves entirely. They are treated as property, not as sentient beings. The Ministry's indifference to their plight is deeply troubling. Hermione Granger, in her fight for house elf rights, formed SPW, Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. She worked tirelessly to raise awareness and change the treatment of house elves, but her efforts were dismissed as naive. Many of her friends thought it was a joke. Ron Weasley even mocked her for it, saying, "You're not really going to try and free them, are you?" The Ministry showed no interest in her cause. No laws were passed to protect house elves, and no one seemed to care. The way house elves are treated is not just a matter of neglect, but of active cruelty. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, we see Dobby, a house elf, severely punished for simply speaking out against his master, Lucius Malfoy. Dobby was beaten and humiliated, but the Ministry remained silent. Dobby's situation was extreme, but he was not alone. Other house elves, like Kreacher, suffered similar fates, yet no one questioned their treatment. They were seen as lesser beings, their pain ignored, their rights non-existent. The Ministry's failure to protect house elves speaks volumes about its priorities. The enslavement of these magical creatures is a glaring issue, one that could easily have been addressed with the right laws, but instead the Ministry turned a blind eye, allowing generations of suffering to continue. Hermione's efforts to challenge this status quo were noble, but without the Ministry's support, they were doomed to be nothing more than an idealistic dream. The treatment of house elves remains one of the darkest secrets in the magical world. Number 12. Safety at Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic repeatedly claimed that the safety of students was its top priority. But the reality at Hogwarts told a different story. Over the 7 years Harry Potter and his friends attended, the school faced more dangers than most Muggle schools could ever imagine. A Muggle institution would have been shut down long ago for such outrageous safety violations. A rampaging troll in the dungeons, a 3-headed dog guarding a secret trapdoor, a basilisk lurking in the Chamber of Secrets. These were just a few of the threats students faced, and yet the Ministry did little to intervene. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a troll is set loose in Hogwarts. It's only because of Harry, Ron, and Hermione's bravery that anyone survives. They end up saving Hermione from the troll, but where was the Ministry's response? The professors did their best to protect the students, but they were left to handle things on their own. The Ministry's response to such threats was always too little, too late. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a dangerous basilisk nearly kills Ginny Weasley, but the Ministry remains silent. They waited until the problem had nearly destroyed the school before taking any action. Dementors were sent to Hogwarts in Harry Potter, and the prisoner of Azkaban, not to protect the students, but to bring in Sirius Black. The students were subjected to terrifying creatures that sucked the very joy from their souls, and still the Ministry did nothing. Harry and his friends were forced to deal with them, once again relying on their own courage. The Ministry's priority seemed to be to maintain its control, not to ensure the safety of those at Hogwarts. The students were treated as if their well-being was a secondary concern, overshadowed by the political agendas of the Ministry. The Ministry's failure to act responsibly was evident in its negligence. When Death Eaters attacked during the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire, the school was left to fend for itself. There was no proper security, no plans to protect the students, only vague assurances that everything would be fine. The consequences of this neglect were dire. Cedric Diggory lost his life, and Harry was dragged into the world of dark magic. The Ministry's lack of action left Hogwarts vulnerable time and time again, and it is clear the safety of the students was never truly their priority. Number 13. Magical creatures and their containment. The magical world is full of creatures that are as wondrous as they are dangerous. Some are only a threat to wizards, but others pose a serious risk to muggles as well. Take Aragog, for instance, the giant acromantula spider living in the Forbidden Forest right next to Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic was fully aware of his presence, yet they did nothing to control or remove the creature. Only when the situation escalated, with Harry and Ron nearly losing their lives, did the threat become undeniable. As Hagrid, his reluctant guardian, would later admit, "It's not as dangerous as you think, but I wouldn't want to see you in a position where you need to find out." Dragons, too, are another prime example of the Ministry is lax control. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard Tournament brought several of these deadly creatures to Hogwarts. The dragons, each one capable of incinerating a human with a single breath, were treated as little more than spectacle. The students, particularly Harry, were thrust into a deadly contest against the dragons with little regard for their safety. The Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, failed to foresee the risk until it was far too late. Quote Samvan. He declared, "Yet his words rang hollow as students risked their lives in the most reckless of ways." This carefree attitude toward the containment and transport of magical creatures is reckless at best. The Ministry, it seems, operates on a reactive rather than proactive basis. They address the dangers when they can no longer ignore them, but by then it is often too late. The dragons at the Triwizard Tournament were brought in with little thought to the safety of the students or the spectators. The risks were obvious, and yet the Ministry's response was sluggish and half-hearted. The lack of proper regulation speaks volumes about their priorities. Control seems to be a secondary concern when spectacle is at stake. The dangers of magical creatures like Aragog and the dragons should have led to stricter regulations, yet the Ministry's failure to act leaves the magical world vulnerable. Instead of taking steps to prevent these threats, they wait until catastrophe strikes. This casual disregard for the safety of both wizards and muggles alike speaks to the Ministry's reluctance to take responsibility. Only when faced with an immediate crisis does the Ministry step in, and by then it is often too late to prevent disaster. Number 14. Legilimency and occlumency. Legilimency and occlumency are powerful magical abilities that allow a wizard to penetrate another's mind. The implications are vast, invading someone's thoughts, memories, and emotions without their consent. Yet this formidable skill is not regulated by the Ministry of Magic. It's a glaring oversight in a world where personal boundaries should be respected. Severus Snape, for example, used legilimency freely against Harry Potter during their lessons. Harry was often left exposed, vulnerable to Snape, as probing thoughts. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Snape forces Harry into a mental struggle, saying, "You can't control your mind, Potter." But it wasn't just Snape. Lord Voldemort, too, wielded legilimency as a tool for domination. The Dark Lord's ability to invade minds gave him an almost godlike power over his followers and enemies. He could manipulate memories and bend others to his will. Harry felt this firsthand. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort used legilimency to force Harry to witness visions of Cedric Diggory's death. Harry was trapped in a mental prison with no escape. This unregulated use of legilimency creates a profound moral dilemma. If a wizard can freely invade another, his thoughts, what happens to privacy? What happens to trust? It's as though the very foundation of personal integrity is shattered. And yet the Ministry of Magic remains indifferent. There's no law, no consequence for this intrusion. A skilled wizard could strip away the most intimate thoughts, memories, and secrets without anyone lifting a finger to stop it. The danger is clear. Legilimency is not just a magical skill, it's a weapon. It's a breach of personal space, a direct assault on the sanctity of the mind. The Ministry's failure to address this issue shows how vulnerable everyone truly is. As Harry struggles against Snape and Voldemort reveal, the ability to control another, his mind isn't just a dark power, the dangerous threat to freedom itself. Number 15. Bank security in Gringotts. In the magical world of Harry Potter, few places are as iconic and central to the economy as Gringotts, the wizarding bank located in Diagon Alley. For centuries, it has been considered the most secure place to store one's wealth and valuables. Gringotts' goblin-run system of vaults, guarded by both magical and physical protections, gives the impression of an impenetrable fortress. However, the events of Deathly Hallows reveal a startling vulnerability that raises important questions about the true state of banking security in the wizarding world. As Harry, Ron, and Hermione infiltrate the depths of Gringotts in their quest to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, the supposed invulnerability of Gringotts proves to be a farce, one that goes unnoticed or ignored by the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry's failure to regulate the magical banking system highlights not just the ineptitude of the governing body, but also the deep flaws in the very structure that was meant to keep wizards' treasures safe. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio decides to infiltrate Gringotts to retrieve one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, they face seemingly insurmountable odds. The bank, with its complex enchantments, its fiercely protective goblins, and its vast underground vaults, appears invincible. There are wards to alert the goblins to any intrusions, and the vaults themselves are shielded by a series of increasingly powerful protective spells. However, as we learn from the trio's daring adventure, these defenses can be breached, the trio using clever subterfuge disguised as employees of the bank, manages to bypass these systems. Hermione uses a combination of Polyjuice Potion and a well-timed charm to blend in, while Ron and Harry take advantage of the confusion. They reach the vault, but it is not the vault's supposed invulnerability that stops them. It is the underlying issue of complacency. With no ministry oversight on the magical protections, The system is left in the hands of goblins, who, despite their considerable skill, are not necessarily equipped to withstand such an insidious and clever intrusion. This event brings to light a critical issue within the magical world. Gringotts, the pinnacle of financial security, can be easily compromised by wizards with enough know-how and magical cunning. The trio, success in breaking into the vault of Bellatrix Lestrange, a vault supposedly protected by the most powerful enchantments, demonstrates how the bank, despite its reputation, is not as secure as it claims to be. While Gringotts is certainly impressive in its defenses, it is ultimately susceptible to skilled magic and, perhaps more damningly, human error. In this case, the vault's defenses are essentially circumvented by the very tools and skills the Ministry of Magic has little control over. No amount of regulatory oversight can protect against wizarding ingenuity, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione demonstrate time and again throughout their journey. The very premise of Gringotts' security system revolves around its ability to prevent magical intrusion. This is achieved through a combination of magical wards, traps, and goblins' knowledge of vault security. However, it's clear that while the goblins are highly skilled, their methods are far from foolproof. The vaults, as Gringotts itself knows all too well, can be manipulated with the right mix of magic, deception, and insider knowledge. As a result, it becomes evident that Gringotts' top-notch security is dependent not just on the strength of the magic, but on the fact that the system has largely been left unchecked by the Ministry. With no external evaluation, the bank is operating under its own rules and assumptions, and when tested, those rules falter. The implications of this are wide-reaching. If even the most powerful financial institution in the wizarding world is susceptible to being breached by 3 teenagers, what would prevent darker forces from exploiting its weaknesses? The Ministry, responsible for regulating magical society, has done little to ensure the safety of the wizarding financial system. While the Ministry is quick to impose rules on witches and wizards, regulating everything from magical creatures to spellcasting, it remains remarkably silent on the subject of banking security. This lack of oversight reflects a broader issue in the Ministry's approach to regulation. It is more focused on controlling behavior than on safeguarding vital institutions. As the trio's infiltration shows, it is not just the public's well-being at stake, it's the security of the entire magical economy. Goblins, though skilled and knowledgeable, have their own agendas and limitations. They are not necessarily motivated by the same concerns that drive other parts of the wizarding world. In fact, it's clear that the goblins have no real stake in protecting the wealth stored within Gringotts, as they are more concerned with maintaining control over their own interests. Their reliance on ancient magics and their belief that their methods are infallible may have led to a complacency that no amount of magical might can undo. Goblins, as seen with the vault's breach, are also vulnerable to outside influence and human trickery. They may have been entrusted with protecting the vaults, but their devotion to safeguarding treasures may not extend as far as many might have hoped. The goblins' independent nature and their uncooperative relationship with wizards reflect the very real risk of a banking system that is too reliant on a single group with questionable motivations. Furthermore, the event at Gringotts shows the limitations of magic in terms of actual security. While magical wards and charms can create barriers, they are not perfect. In the world of Harry Potter, where spells can be learned, adapted, and altered, no enchantment is truly foolproof. Even the most advanced charms, like the ones guarding the vaults, can be defeated by wizards with enough knowledge and cunning. This raises a critical question about the role of the ministry in overseeing magical financial institutions. Why has the ministry failed to ensure that banking security is standardized and checked for weaknesses? If the ministry cannot even protect one of the most important magical institutions from a simple heist, how can it be trusted to regulate anything? Number 16. Personal magical artifacts. In the magical world of Harry Potter, where spells, potions, and mythical creatures abound, the existence of magical artifacts is one of the most fascinating aspects of this universe. From enchanted time-turners to the ever-elusive invisibility cloaks, these items hold immense power and influence over the lives of witches and wizards. However, despite their importance, there is one glaring aspect that the Ministry of Magic has seemingly neglected throughout the years: the regulation of personal magical artifacts. It's a curious anomaly that begs the question, why doesn't the ministry keep better track of these items? After all, magical artifacts can be just as dangerous as any dark spell, and in the wrong hands they could wreak havoc across the wizarding world. Consider, for example, the infamous wand of Lord Voldemort stolen from Gregorovitch, a renowned wand-maker. This wand, one of the most powerful in existence, passed through many hands without any recorded effort on the part of the ministry to monitor or track its movement. Despite Voldemort's obvious interest in acquiring the most powerful magical instruments, the ministry never seemed to catch wind of his acquisition of such a powerful wand. The lack of surveillance or control over such an artifact demonstrates the ministry's lack of foresight in safeguarding magical objects that could be used for nefarious purposes. If the ministry had been more vigilant, they might have stopped Voldemort much earlier. Yet the ministry, occupied with regulating spells and magical creatures, ignored this crucial element of magical security. Harry Potter, the very hero destined to defeat Voldemort, also had access to a powerful magical artifact, his invisibility cloak. This cloak, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, allowed him to disappear from sight, a powerful and often dangerous tool. Yet Harry used this cloak freely throughout his years at Hogwarts, and not once did the ministry intervene. In fact, no one seemed to question the existence of such an artifact, even though it clearly had the potential to aid in the concealment of dangerous activities. The cloak, after all, was not a mere trinket. It was a tool that could easily be used for espionage, theft, or worse. It is puzzling how such a significant object, linked to the very nature of Voldemort's eventual downfall, could go unnoticed by the ministry. Harry's use of the cloak was not a singular case. Throughout the series, numerous magical artifacts are used by witches and wizards without the ministry's knowledge or control. In the Philosopher's Stone, we see the Mirror of Erist, a powerful magical object that grants the user the ability to see their deepest desires. While it is not as immediately dangerous as other artifacts, it certainly possesses the potential to distort reality and manipulate minds. The fact that such an object exists without any sort of regulation or documentation is troubling, especially when considering its use by individuals like Harry and his friends. It is clear that the ministry, despite its many bureaucratic measures, has failed to regulate such items, leaving the wizarding world vulnerable to their misuse. The absence of oversight by the ministry is not just a simple oversight, it is a systemic failure to acknowledge the risks inherent in personal magical objects. This is not to say that all magical objects are inherently dangerous. The lack of attention given to them raises important questions about the ministry priorities. The ministry, more focused on maintaining the status quo and controlling the magical community, whose behavior through laws and decrees has largely ignored the very instruments that could change the balance of power within the wizarding world. Magical artifacts, unlike spells or creatures, are physical objects that can be hidden, stolen, and hoarded by those who wish to abuse them. One striking example of the ministry lack of control is the situation surrounding the Time Turner, the magical device that allows the user to travel back in time. The Time Turner is a potent artifact capable of altering the course of history itself. Yet it was freely used by Hermione Granger in her third year at Hogwarts, a year when the Ministry of Magic was fully aware of the dangerous happenings surrounding Sirius Black's escape. Despite the implications of using such a device, the Ministry did nothing to regulate its use. Hermione, who was trusted with the artifact for academic purposes, was never questioned about the potential consequences of using time travel to manipulate events. It's remarkable that such a powerful tool was treated so casually by the Ministry, with little regard for the long-term ramifications. Moreover, when looking at the larger picture, the Ministry's inaction in regulating magical artifacts becomes even more baffling. The Ministry has long been obsessed with controlling the movement of magical creatures, regulating the use of dark magic, and enforcing laws against those who use magic inappropriately. However, when it comes to personal magical artifacts, the Ministry seems to turn a blind eye. Wands, for instance, are registered to their owners, and it's clear that some magical items, like cursed objects, are subject to regulation. But why not the rest? Why are objects like the invisibility cloak, the time turner, or the mirror of Erised free from any oversight? The Ministry's failure to regulate these objects is a glaring oversight, one that contributes to the dangers faced by the wizarding world. Even when it comes to wands, which are the primary magical tool of any wizard or witch, the Ministry's control is still limited. While wands are registered to their owners, the process is far from perfect. The Death Eaters, led by Voldemort, were able to create powerful, new wands that defied Ministry control, such as Voldemort's own wand. The fact that wands with such immense power could pass from one dark wizard to another without any significant intervention from the Ministry is a testament to the weaknesses in their magical oversight system. The idea that powerful artifacts like wands and cloaks could be used without any real checks is troubling, especially when considering the potential for these items to fall into the wrong hands. Number 17. Magical diseases and epidemics. In the magical world of Harry Potter, despite the seemingly vast knowledge and control the Ministry of Magic exerts over various aspects of wizarding society, one crucial area is conspicuously neglected: magical diseases and epidemics. The Ministry, with all its resources, fails to establish a coherent or centralized system to deal with the health crises that inevitably arise in the magical community. While the magical world has its share of hospitals and healers, like St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, the lack of foresight and preparation in handling outbreaks is a troubling aspect of the wizarding world that remains largely unexplored. St. Mungo's Hospital is the only dedicated medical institution in the wizarding world, yet even it is portrayed as overwhelmed and underprepared for the scale of magical illnesses and injuries. The hospital is known for treating all sorts of strange and dangerous conditions, but its very existence points to a deep flaw in the ministry's approach. Despite its impressive staff and advanced magical treatments, there is no evidence of a centralized health body within the ministry that oversees public health issues. Instead, magical diseases and injuries appear to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, often without any coordinated response. This raises questions about the ministry's priorities and its reluctance to establish a regulatory framework for dealing with widespread health threats. One particularly troubling magical illness mentioned in the series is dragonpox, a dangerous disease that manifests in spots and boils, often accompanied by fever. The disease is highly contagious, yet there is no apparent system in place to monitor or control outbreaks. The severity of dragonpox is well known within the wizarding community, and it is even hinted at that some healers might have used magical remedies to delay the inevitable progression of the disease. However, no large-scale efforts to curb its spread are evident. This lack of central oversight is a telling example of the ministry's disregard for public health. Instead of having a system that would regularly check for and manage potential magical diseases, the ministry is caught off guard when outbreaks occur, relying on individual efforts to manage the situation. A more alarming example of magical illnesses that the ministry fails to regulate is lycanthropy, the condition of werewolves. Lycanthropy is a magical disease with severe social implications. The transformation of a person into a werewolf is not only dangerous for the individual, but for everyone around them. Werewolves are often ostracized, discriminated against, and even hunted, as they are seen as a threat to society. Yet despite the potential for widespread social and medical consequences, there is no established system for controlling lycanthropy or offering support to those afflicted. The ministry's treatment of lycanthropy is one of neglect. While the wolfsbane potion is a known cure to alleviate some symptoms of lycanthropy, it is rarely accessible to all who need it. The social stigma surrounding werewolves, combined with the ministry's lack of a clear plan for addressing the condition, speaks to a larger failure in ensuring the health and well-being of the magical community. The most troubling aspect of this neglect is that it is not just illnesses like dragonpox or lycanthropy that the ministry fails to manage. The broader issue of magical side effects from spells and curses is never adequately addressed. In the wizarding world, there are numerous magical ailments that result from spells gone wrong or curses placed upon individuals. For example, characters such as Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter himself are frequently subjected to unintended side effects from spells and potions. While St. Mungo is equipped to handle injuries from spells, the ministry has no apparent system in place for tracking the long-term effects or preventing the abuse of such magic. The idea that the wizarding world would be so reliant on the individual efforts of healers and the wizarding community to deal with such medical issues without a formalized system is a glaring oversight. In contrast, the Muggle world has public health systems that work proactively to prevent and contain disease outbreaks. The Ministry of Magic, however, seems to operate reactively, waiting until a crisis has occurred before attempting to deal with it. This failure is particularly evident when considering the many magical creatures that inhabit the wizarding world, many of which are dangerous and can spread diseases. For example, the dangerous blast-ended Skrewts are noted for their violent tendencies and unpredictable behavior. In theory, if the ministry were more proactive, it would be able to regulate the breeding and care of such creatures in order to prevent them from becoming a threat to both magical and non-magical communities. Instead, creatures like these are left unchecked, and the consequences are often catastrophic. This lack of regulation is also seen in how the Ministry handles magical accidents and injuries. Throughout the series, there are multiple instances of magical accidents that leave individuals permanently damaged. In some cases, these injuries are life-altering, yet no efforts are made to put in place systems to prevent such accidents from happening again. The Quidditch matches, for instance, are filled with injuries and accidents, and while healers are readily available to treat the injured, no larger initiatives are taken to reduce the occurrence of such injuries in the first place. Similarly, magical creatures are frequently used for dangerous tasks, yet there is no apparent system of checks and balances to ensure that these creatures are treated with the necessary precautions. Number 18. Curses and forbidden magic in daily life. The wizarding world is governed by rules, a complex system of checks and balances intended to keep magic in check, yet there are undeniable areas where the Ministry of Magic falters. One of the most disturbing gaps in this system revolves around the use of curses and forbidden magic in daily life. Though there are clear laws regarding the unforgivable curses, Avada Kedavra, Imperius, and Cruciatus, the Ministry's regulation of these dark arts is far from strict. These curses are supposed to be punishable by a life sentence in Azkaban, yet time and again the Ministry has proven to be inefficient in its enforcement, allowing certain individuals to escape punishment or delay justice for years. At the very heart of the issue is the inconsistency in the Ministry's responses to these grave offences. The laws against these curses were put in place to prevent the misuse of magic for terror, control, yet in many cases they are ignored or circumvented. The use of these curses in everyday life is a deeply troubling subject, as it reflects the Ministry, its neglect of the more insidious dangers that permeate the magical world. The most glaring example of this neglect comes from the infamous case of Bellatrix Lestrange, a key follower of Lord Voldemort who used the Cruciatus curse on the Longbottoms, Alice and Frank. Bellatrix was convicted for this crime, but only after Voldemort's fall, years after the terrible event. The Longbottoms torture is one of the darkest chapters in the wizarding world. When Bellatrix and other Death Eaters captured them, they subjected the couple to the Cruciatus curse, which causes excruciating pain. The couple was tortured for days, and the damage was so severe that they were left permanently incapacitated, unable to ever recover fully. Despite the sheer brutality of the crime, the Ministry's response was appallingly slow. It took years after the event for Bellatrix Lestrange to even face trial, and the punishment, though severe, came too late to undo the harm done. The Longbottoms had already paid the price, their lives ruined by the curse, while Bellatrix was allowed to roam free for far too long. This is not an isolated incident, but a pattern of inefficiency and neglect. The Ministry's tendency to overlook or delay action on such issues highlights a deeper problem within the magical government. How many other cases like the Longbottoms were swept under the rug, forgotten in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Ministry? After all, Bellatrix was not the only one who used the Cruciatus curse for personal gain. The world was filled with individuals, some affiliated with dark forces and others not, who employed such magic for malicious purposes without facing appropriate consequences. These are the hidden victims of an unforgiving magical society whose pain is often buried in forgotten records or dismissed as unimportant. In addition to the Cruciatus curse, the Imperius curse and Avada Kedavra are just as dangerous, though their use is far more insidious because they allow individuals to act without the consequences of their actions. The imperious curse, which places the victim under complete control of the caster, removes free will and forces the victim to carry out the caster's bidding. This curse was particularly useful to Voldemort and his followers, allowing them to manipulate anyone they wished into committing heinous acts without ever facing the consequences. Even those who were supposed to be defenders of justice, like the Aurors, could fall victim to the imperious curse and act against their will. Yet again the Ministry of Magic turned a blind eye, focusing more on appearances and reputation than real justice. The use of Avada Kedavra, the killing curse, is perhaps the most obvious form of prohibited magic, as it leaves no room for argument or denial. It is an instant and irreversible death. Despite its lethal nature, the Ministry failed to clamp down on the use of this curse until it was far too late. Death Eaters used it freely during the First and Second Wars, and their actions were often ignored or downplayed by the Ministry. The cases of individuals who were murdered with Avada Kedavra are numerous, and yet there is little evidence to suggest that any of the perpetrators faced meaningful consequences until the very end. The deaths of key figures like Harry Potter's parents, Lily and James, were a direct result of the use of this curse, but those responsible were never held to account in the way that would be expected by a just society. Even after the defeat of Voldemort, the Ministry's approach to these curses remained inconsistent. While it did take measures to banish the most obvious dangers, it was clear that much of the damage had already been done. The scars left on the wizarding world from these curses were not easily healed, and the Ministry's failure to adequately address the use of forbidden magic in daily life meant that the magical community had to live with the consequences of their inaction. The fear that one could fall victim to one of these curses in a moment of weakness, or that the curses could be used without recourse, was a constant source of anxiety for many witches and wizards. It is impossible to ignore the power dynamics at play in these cases. The Ministry of Magic, like many bureaucratic institutions, often prioritizes power and influence over justice. Those who were aligned with Voldemort or other powerful figures were able to manipulate the system to avoid punishment, while those without connections were left to suffer. The lack of accountability for those who used these dark curses was a stark reminder of the inequalities that existed within the magical world. Bellatrix Lestrange's trial was a rare instance of justice being served, but it came far too late to be considered truly just. For the Longbottoms, their lives were irrevocably altered by the actions of a single individual, and it took years of bureaucracy to bring any form of justice. Furthermore, there is the issue of the Ministry's reluctance to intervene in everyday situations where forbidden magic might be used. The prevalence of magical objects and potions that could cause harm or be used for nefarious purposes was widespread, yet the Ministry often failed to regulate these effectively. Many dark wizards and witches were able to access dangerous magical tools, creating a constant undercurrent of danger. The Ministry's inability to enforce proper regulations on everyday magic meant that the common witch or wizard was often left unprotected against the worst kinds of magical abuse. In addition, the ability to conceal the use of these curses and the anonymity of the perpetrators made it even harder for the Ministry to intervene. The secretive nature of the dark arts meant that even when magic was used maliciously, it was often difficult for anyone to prove it. This left many victims with no recourse. their suffering invisible to the wider magical community. The very fact that dark magic could be used without detection meant that the ministry's laws, while theoretically in place to protect, were ineffectual in practice. Despite the obvious flaws in the ministry's handling of forbidden magic, there were also those within the system who fought to uphold justice. Figures like Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley stood against the tyranny of dark magic and sought to expose the injustices within the ministry. Their efforts, while often heroic, also exposed the inherent weaknesses in the ministry's approach to justice. The trio, whose work during the Battle of Hogwarts and the following years showed that even in the face of overwhelming evil, there was still hope for change. But that change would only come through the courage of individuals who were willing to challenge the status quo. The magical world, as struggles with curses and forbidden magic, reveal the extent to which the ministry failed to protect its citizens. The inconsistent enforcement of laws surrounding the unforgivable curses and other dark magic practices undermines the very foundation of justice within the wizarding community. Whether through neglect, political maneuvering, or simple inefficiency, the Ministry of Magic's inability to regulate these dangerous aspects of magic continues to haunt the magical world. The lingering question remains: how many more innocent lives were affected by the ministry? As to failure to act, how many more would be if the system remained unchanged? The dark legacy of these curses is a reminder of the imperfections in the magical world and the ongoing struggle to ensure that justice, no matter how difficult, is served. Number 19. Hogwarts Curriculum Oversight. In the magical world of Harry Potter, there is a strange oversight within the Ministry of Magic that affects one of the most crucial institutions in the wizarding world, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Hogwarts, as the premier school of magic in Britain, seems like a place that would require stringent oversight and regulation, especially considering the vast array of magical subjects taught. However, despite the significance of the education provided there, the ministry does little to ensure that students are learning in a safe and effective environment. In fact, the ministry's approach to Hogwarts is largely passive, stepping in only when it wishes to exert control in a heavy-handed manner. The lack of a system for certifying teachers or regularly checking the content of the curriculum speaks volumes about the disorganization and dangers lurking in the halls of Hogwarts. At first glance, one might assume that the Ministry of Magic, which governs nearly every aspect of the magical world, would be deeply invested in what and how students at Hogwarts are taught. The students of Hogwarts study dangerous magical arts, fiery spells, potions that can cause death, and creatures that could easily end their lives if not handled properly. In such an environment, one would expect that the ministry would impose strict regulations on both the curriculum and the teachers delivering it. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Instead, the ministry's involvement in the daily workings of the school is surprisingly minimal, and the quality of education is left largely to the whims of the headmaster and the individual teachers, many of whom are far from suitable for their roles. Take, for example, Remus Lupin, the werewolf who served as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher during Harry Potter, his third year at Hogwarts. Lupin, though an excellent teacher, was never properly vetted by the ministry. It is clear that the ministry would have disapproved of a werewolf teaching a subject so crucial to students' safety and well-being, yet they made no efforts to intervene when he was hired. In fact, Lupin's tenure at Hogwarts was remarkable not for any intervention by the ministry, but because it was only brought to an end when his condition as a werewolf was discovered. This lack of oversight, or even a basic consideration of safety, is a glaring example of how the ministry had no real systems in place to ensure that the teachers at Hogwarts were fit for the responsibility they held. The next example that highlights the ministry's failure to properly regulate Hogwarts comes with Severus Snape, who taught potions and later became the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher and head of Slytherin House. Snape, as we learn, had a complex past, one that included his association with Voldemort as a Death Eater. Despite his questionable past, Snape was allowed to continue teaching at Hogwarts without any sort of investigation or scrutiny from the ministry. His tenure at the school raises a pressing question: how could the ministry, which was so quick to intervene in other areas of magical life, overlook the potentially dangerous history of a teacher who had once been an active supporter of the Dark Lord? Snape's appointment to the role of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher is especially troubling when considering the kind of character required to teach a subject that directly deals with magical dangers. Snape, with his personal biases and evident distaste for certain students, was hardly an ideal candidate for such a position. Yet the ministry did nothing to ensure that the teacher was suitable for the role, and his influence over the students was unchecked, even as he treated them with disdain and cruelty. This lack of accountability for Hogwarts' staff reveals a deep flaw in the way the ministry handles education, especially considering the significant impact these teachers have on young witches and wizards. The most glaring example of the ministry's incompetence and disregard for the safety of Hogwarts students, however, comes with the arrival of Dolores Umbridge. When the ministry sought to assert control over Hogwarts during Harry Potter's 5th year, they did so through the appointment of Umbridge as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Unlike Lupin and Snape, who were competent in their teaching, even if they weren't always suitable for their positions, Umbridge was entirely unqualified. A sadistic bureaucrat with a twisted sense of authority, she was sent by the ministry not to ensure that students received a quality education, but to enforce the ministry's control over the school. Her tenure at Hogwarts was a textbook example of the ministry's heavy-handed approach. They intervened not because they cared about the quality of education, but because they wanted to suppress dissent and control the narrative surrounding the Dark Lord's return. Umbridge's presence at Hogwarts revealed a frightening truth. The ministry was not interested in improving or regulating the teaching at the school. Their primary concern was controlling the message, particularly when it came to the rise of Voldemort. When it became clear that Harry and others were speaking out against the ministry's denial of Voldemort's return, the ministry intervened not by providing better oversight or teachers, but by placing someone like Umbridge in power. Instead of focusing on providing students with the tools to defend themselves against dark magic, the ministry focused on suppressing information and controlling the narrative, showing just how little they cared about the safety of the students at Hogwarts. But perhaps the most dangerous part of the ministry's lack of oversight is the absence of any system for teacher certification or regular inspections of the curriculum. In the Muggle world, teachers are typically required to have certifications and undergo regular performance evaluations to ensure they are capable of providing quality education. However, at Hogwarts, no such system exists. Teachers are hired based on their own merits, or in some cases, their past associations with powerful individuals, rather than their ability to provide the best possible education. This lack of checks and balances makes it possible for unsuitable, even dangerous individuals to be placed in positions of power over young minds. And as we see with characters like Umbridge, these teachers are free to inflict harm upon students without any oversight. The magical world, and Hogwarts in particular, operates under a unique set of rules, but the absence of basic regulatory frameworks within the education system has far-reaching consequences. Hogwarts, despite being the best school for magical education in Britain, is left to operate without the proper oversight, and this leaves students vulnerable to manipulation, abuse, and dangerous incompetence. The Ministry of Magic may have been quick to regulate many aspects of the magical world, but when it came to the safety and well-being of young witches and wizards at Hogwarts, their inaction and disregard for proper oversight are both alarming and dangerous. It is easy to argue that the lack of regulation within Hogwarts is one of the most significant flaws in the magical world. While the ministry had the power to oversee the activities of magical citizens, including regulating magical creatures and punishing dark wizards, they failed to ensure that the students at Hogwarts received the education they needed to defend themselves against the dangers of the magical world. In the absence of proper oversight, the teachers who were hired to protect and guide young witches and wizards were sometimes woefully unprepared or downright dangerous. This lack of regulation was a tragic oversight that allowed some of the most perilous individuals to teach and guide students, putting their lives at risk. As we reflect on the failures of the Ministry of Magic, it is clear that the magical world, like any society, needs accountability and regulation. Whether it is ensuring that teachers are properly vetted, maintaining standards for education, or intervening when necessary to protect young minds, the ministry's failure to regulate Hogwarts had dire consequences. The story of Harry Potter is, in many ways, a story of how a lack of oversight can lead to dangerous outcomes. It is a reminder that when the systems meant to protect us fail, those with power are often free to do as they please, regardless of the cost to others. Number 20. Memory charms and mind manipulation. In the wizarding world of Harry Potter, magic is both a tool and a weapon, shaping lives in ways that the magical authorities rarely scrutinize. One aspect of magic that remains strikingly unregulated despite its immense potential for harm is the use of memory manipulation, specifically through the use of the spell Obliviate. This spell, which allows wizards and witches to erase or alter memories, represents one of the most intrusive forms of magic, one that, if misused, could disrupt not only an individual's life but their very sense of identity. Despite its power, the Ministry of Magic has failed to establish strict controls or oversight on its use, leaving its deployment largely unchecked. This absence of regulation is particularly alarming when we consider the far-reaching consequences of such a spell on both the personal and societal levels. Memory, in any world, is the foundation of our identity. It defines our understanding of who we are, where we come from, and what we've experienced. Erasing or altering someone's memories is nothing less than an act of violence against the self. Yet in the wizarding world, Obliviate is treated as a simple tool, one used routinely to protect the magical community from the non-magical world, and occasionally to conceal inconvenient truths. The Ministry of Magic's failure to closely regulate the use of such a dangerous spell suggests a troubling blind spot in its governance of magical affairs, one that allows for the manipulation of a person's identity with no serious consequences. A telling example of Obliviate's use comes early in the series, when Harry and Hermione, in an effort to protect their magical secrets, erased the memory of the Muggle couple, the Dursleys. While this event may seem trivial in comparison to the spell's other uses, it demonstrates the casualness with which memory manipulation is handled. The Dursleys, oblivious to the details of Harry's life, have their memories wiped clean, allowing Harry to continue living with them. However, the lasting effects of such a powerful spell on the minds of the Dursleys remain unclear. What of their erased memories? What impact does the manipulation of their consciousness have on their relationship with Harry and their own understanding of reality? But perhaps the most disturbing example of Obliviate's abuse comes from the actions of Gilderoy Lockhart, a character who embodies the most egregious misuse of memory-altering magic. Lockhart, a famous but fraudulently acclaimed wizard, used Obliviate to erase the memories of those he had wronged or deceived. His career was built not on accomplishments, but on stealing the achievements of others and erasing the memories of those who could reveal the truth. It is clear that for Lockhart, memory manipulation was not just a tool, but the foundation of his rise to fame. His use of Obliviate on a wide scale to hide his own incompetence and falsehoods is a grim reminder of the dangers inherent in magic that can manipulate memory. The Ministry, despite its supposed vigilance over magical law and order, failed to monitor his use of Obliviate, allowing Lockhart to continue his career of deceit without consequence. Lockhart's actions raise a fundamental question. Why hasn't the Ministry of Magic intervened to regulate such a powerful and dangerous spell? Given the risks posed by memory manipulation, one would think that the Ministry would have imposed strict guidelines on its use, yet this isn't the case. The Ministry's failure to regulate Obliviate suggests a broader issue with how the magical world perceives the significance of memory. For the Ministry, the erasure of memories seems less like an ethical violation and more like a routine procedure, easily used by any wizard who deems it necessary. This lack of regulation allows individuals like Lockhart to manipulate others without fear of reprisal. The use of Obliviate in the wizarding world is not just about the erasure of inconvenient facts, it is about controlling the very fabric of a person's identity. If a person's memories can be altered or erased, what is left of their autonomy? What is left of their identity? This is a question that the Ministry of Magic has yet to address. While they have extensive laws governing magical creatures, dark magic, and other forms of magical malpractice, memory manipulation seems to slip through the cracks. The fact that the Ministry allows the use of Obliviate without sufficient oversight speaks volumes about how little it values personal autonomy in the wizarding world. In fact, the casual use of Obliviate by wizards tasked with enforcing the statute of secrecy, such as the Obliviators, further demonstrates the normalization of memory manipulation. Obliviators are responsible for erasing the memories of Muggles who witness magical events, often with little regard for the long-term effects of their actions. These erasures are done quickly and without much thought, leaving the Muggles to go on with their lives, albeit with significant gaps in their memories. While it may be convenient for the wizarding world to use Obliviate as a quick fixing to keep their magical secrets safe, the ethical ramifications of such widespread use remain largely unexamined. The impact of memory manipulation on Muggles is rarely, if ever, considered, and there is little accountability for the Obliviators who carry out these erasures. The lack of regulation is also evident in the broader magical community. Wizards and witches often use Obliviate to cover up personal mistakes or to hide evidence of wrongdoing. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, for example, when Barty Crouch Jr. manipulates events to put Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire, he uses Obliviate to erase the memories of key individuals in order to keep his secret plans intact. This selective use of memory alteration is indicative of a culture in which memory manipulation is a tool for maintaining power, avoiding accountability, and protecting one's reputation. In a world where such manipulation is so easy and accessible, the boundaries between right and wrong become increasingly blurred. The Ministry's failure to regulate Obliviate also reflects a deeper issue within the magical bureaucracy. The Ministry is more concerned with maintaining the status quo and enforcing its laws than it is with ensuring that magic is used ethically. In a world where the rules often protect the powerful and allow the weak to suffer, the consequences of misusing a spell like Obliviate are rarely fully explored. The magical authorities would rather ignore the ethical dilemmas posed by memory manipulation than confront the uncomfortable reality of how such spells are being misused. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the Ministry's failure to regulate Obliviate is the lack of accountability for its use. Gilderoy Lockhart, for example, faces no consequences for the countless lives he damaged with his use of memory charms. His actions are a testament to the power of unchecked magic, and his ultimate fate, being rendered amnesiac himself after a failed attempt to erase his own memories, serves as a cruel irony. But it also highlights the dangers of a system that allows such magic to be used recklessly and without repercussion. The lack of regulation surrounding memory manipulation is a fundamental flaw in the Ministry of Magic's approach to magical law. Memory is sacred, yet the wizarding world treats it as a commodity to be altered and erased at will. The Ministry's failure to protect the most intimate and fundamental part of an individual's identity, their memories, is a stark reminder of the dangers of magical power unchecked by ethical considerations. While the Ministry may continue to ignore the problem, the consequences of its inaction are far-reaching, and the impact of memory manipulation on the lives of wizards, witches, and muggles alike cannot be underestimated. In the end, the story of Obliviate is not just about the magic itself, but about what it reveals concerning the magical world's values. Memory manipulation is more than just a tool for hiding secrets. It is a powerful means of controlling identity, and the Ministry's refusal to regulate its use speaks volumes about its priorities. The failure to regulate such a dangerous and intrusive form of magic leaves the wizarding world vulnerable to abuse, and until this issue is addressed, the line between right and wrong in the magical community will remain dangerously blurred. Number 21. Mental health in the wizarding world. In the magical world of Harry Potter, where dark wizards roam freely and monstrous creatures lurk in every corner, one aspect of society remains strangely untouched: psychological help for witches and wizards. Despite the relentless dangers they face, neither Hogwarts nor the Ministry of Magic provides any formal system for mental health care. This significant gap, the lack of attention to the psychological well-being of its citizens, stands as one of the most glaring oversights in the wizarding world, especially when considering the trauma Harry Potter and others experience throughout their lives. Harry's journey through his teenage years is marked by unimaginable hardships. From witnessing the death of Cedric Diggory in the graveyard to constantly living under the shadow of Lord Voldemort's return, the toll on his psyche is enormous, and yet throughout all this, There is no mention of any support system in place to help Harry cope with the trauma. After Cedric's death, Harry is left alone with his grief, his only solace being his conversations with Dumbledore. But these conversations are rarely enough to provide the depth of support needed to deal with such significant loss. There is no formal counselor, no psychologist or healer specifically trained to help with the emotional damage of facing death and terror on a regular basis. In many ways, this lack of psychological support makes the magical community appear woefully unprepared to help its most vulnerable members, particularly its youth. It's hard to imagine a society that requires children to face life-threatening situations regularly and yet doesn't offer them any structured help. Hogwarts, the very school that trains young witches and wizards, offers no classes or resources dedicated to mental health. The closest semblance of help seems to come from teachers, like the occasional talks with Dumbledore or the fleeting moments of advice from characters like Professor McGonagall. But these are informal and insufficient. Even the most traumatic events in the school, like the attack on Harry during his first year, or the loss of friends and allies in the Triwizard Tournament, are dealt with through brief discussions rather than consistent professional intervention. Throughout the series, Harry, who is forced to grow up too quickly, struggles with deep-seated trauma, from the deaths of his parents to the horrors he faces at school and in battle. His internal struggles are largely ignored or glossed over. Harry's need for professional help is particularly clear after the harrowing events in, quote 34. Having been forced to witness Cedric's death, an event that marks the end of Harry's childhood innocence, Harry is profoundly affected. Yet there is no intervention. The lack of psychological support is staggering. Harry does not receive therapy or even have the chance to speak with a professional about the impact that Cedric's death has had on him. Instead, he's left to internalize the trauma, eventually manifesting in his nightmares and his difficulty concentrating. But it's not just Harry who suffers. The other characters also deal with their own traumas, and yet they too lack proper mental health resources. Ron Weasley, for example, carries his own burden of fear and insecurity, particularly in the aftermath of the events surrounding his brothers and their involvement in the war against Voldemort. Ron has his own experiences with loss, not just the fear of losing his family, but the emotional toll of growing up in the shadow of Harry's fame. Hermione Granger, often portrayed as a beacon of intelligence and rationality, is also affected by the pressure of the war, the sense of constant danger, and the weight of having to live up to impossible expectations. She too faces emotional struggles, though they are not fully addressed or explored in the books. Even characters like Neville Longbottom, who has dealt with deep personal loss and a harsh upbringing, show signs of emotional strain, but their struggles remain largely unacknowledged by the society they live in. The absence of mental health care becomes even more evident when we look at the events in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Harry's visions of Voldemort's return and his growing anger are clearly linked to the trauma he has suffered, yet no one offers him the help he needs. He becomes increasingly isolated, believing that the magical world is not interested in his well-being. It's telling that when Harry finally seeks guidance from Professor Snape, it's only to learn about his own capacity for anger and the darkness within him. The emphasis is not on healing, but on survival and controlling the internal chaos. The lack of a structured support system contributes to Harry is emotional isolation, and as the story progresses, it becomes evident that Harry is left to manage his trauma alone. Even more concerning is the absence of any formal support for the general populace. The Ministry of Magic, the governing body of the magical world, remains fixated on controlling and maintaining the safety of the community through magical means. There are countless departments dedicated to regulating magical creatures, ensuring proper use of magic, and investigating dark wizards. Yet, when it comes to the mental well-being of its citizens, particularly in the aftermath of traumatic events like the First and Second Wizarding Wars, there is a conspicuous silence. In a society where dark magic and curses are so commonplace, the psychological scars left by these forces are never addressed. If there are any official healers, they focus almost entirely on physical injuries or magical ailments, never on the emotional toll of war and terror. In the case of Harry's continued battle with Voldemort, his emotional state remains a secondary concern. The wizarding world, with its obsession with external threats, fails to understand that the real damage is often internal. The psychological effects of constant danger, the loss of loved ones, and the strain of war on young minds cannot be underestimated. This lack of foresight regarding mental health becomes apparent as the story continues, as the characters, especially Harry, find themselves in increasingly dire emotional states. It's clear that despite all the magical wonders at their disposal, the wizarding world has failed to provide a crucial service, a framework for emotional healing. One of the few instances where psychological support is hinted at is in the case of the Weasley family after the loss of Fred. In the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Weasley family, as grief is palpable, but there is no mention of any formal support for them as they cope with such a devastating loss, while family and friends provide some solace. There is no mention of professional help or any structured program for emotional recovery after the war. This lack of psychological care for those who experienced loss during the war is heartbreaking, and it suggests that the magical community, for all its advancements, is woefully unprepared to handle the psychological ramifications of such traumatic events. Ultimately, the lack of mental health support in the wizarding world is a glaring oversight that underscores the inadequacies of the Ministry of Magic and the magical society as a whole. By neglecting the emotional needs of its citizens, particularly its youth, the wizarding world fails to ensure their overall well-being. Harry Potter's experiences are an extreme example, but they reflect a broader societal issue: the refusal to acknowledge that emotional pain and trauma need to be treated with as much care and attention as physical injuries. In the end, it is clear that the magical world must evolve, not only in its approach to physical health, but in its understanding of the importance of psychological care. Number 22. Wand licensing and weapon control. In the wizarding world, the wand is far more than a simple tool. It is an instrument of immense power. A wand can heal, charm, curse, or even kill. Yet despite its potency, the Ministry of Magic, the governing body of the wizarding community, has never imposed a system of regulation or licensing for this weapon of magic. To any outsider from the Muggle world, this would seem nothing short of reckless, but within the confines of the magical society, it is a norm that remains unquestioned. At the age of 11, young witches and wizards receive their first wand. They acquire it from a wand maker, typically Ollivanders, and are handed this powerful item with little more than a casual warning: There is no formal training in how to wield it responsibly, nor any extensive vetting of the individual's character. They are simply trusted with the potential for great harm. In the Muggle world, the idea of handing a child a weapon without a thorough background check, a detailed training process, or even any kind of regulation would be unthinkable. But in the wizarding world, the wand is regarded as a rite of passage, a symbol of magical maturity, with little regard for the consequences of its misuse. When Harry Potter first received his wand, he was, like all other students, handed this tool without any real instruction on its dangers. He was merely told that it was, quote, 40. The only magical instruction regarding the wand was that it would work best with him, as if it were an extension of his own soul. Yet the wand is not merely a symbol of one's magical abilities. It can be used to kill, maim, and control. Yet no formal process exists to ensure that its owner is capable of using it responsibly. A wand in the wrong hands could be a tool of terror, as evidenced by the actions of dark wizards like Lord Voldemort. His wand, composed of powerful components, became an extension of his own malevolent will. Yet there was no oversight on the way it was used, no magical equivalent of a gun license or safety training. This is a glaring oversight within a society that claims to regulate everything, from flying broomsticks to the use of magical creatures. The Ministry's failure to regulate wands has consequences that extend beyond the safety of individual witches and wizards. The very idea of having such an accessible and powerful tool without the scrutiny of any sort of monitoring system speaks to a larger problem in the magical community, a lack of foresight in how dangerous it could be if misused. When a wand is handed over to a child, there is no check to see if that child can be trusted with it, or if they have the discipline to wield it responsibly. The only deterrent to improper use is the very occasional reminder from school staff or parents, yet this is far from a regulatory system. Moreover, the only mechanism in place to monitor a wand, its use, is the trace, a spell that detects underage magic. However, this system only works until the wizard or witch reaches their 17th birthday. Once they are of age, they are free to perform magic without any traceable repercussions. Harry Potter himself was frequently subject to this magical surveillance during his youth, such as when he used his wand to blow up Aunt Marge. But once he turned 17, the system ceased to track him, leaving him to wield his wand without any official accountability. This is a strange paradox. The Ministry of Magic is fully aware of how dangerous an unregulated wand can be, yet once a witch or wizard reaches the age of majority, they are essentially granted carte blanche. In the wizarding world, the lack of regulation means that a wand can be used at the personal discretion of the witch or wizard, regardless of their moral compass. When Harry used his wand to defend himself against the likes of Draco Malfoy, or when he summoned the Patronus to protect his friends, he was exercising his magical powers in a way that felt justified. But what if another wizard used the same power for darker purposes? If a child with a temper or a malicious spirit were to be granted a wand, there is nothing to prevent them from using it as a weapon. In the Muggle world, this would be akin to giving a person a firearm with no background check, no training, and no consideration for their intent. The responsibility of a wand owner or any magical person is largely self-imposed. This is seen in the way wands are treated throughout Hogwarts. Though the students are taught spells, they are not consistently reminded of the moral consequences of wielding such immense power. In the real world, people are taught the responsibility of using tools like knives, firearms, and vehicles with care, understanding that their misuse can have grave consequences. But the magical world, especially when it comes to wand use, operates under a kind of lax assumption that magic is inherently benign or benign enough to be used without concern. Consider how the wand was used during the Battle of Hogwarts. The numerous wands clashing against each other demonstrated the chaos of a world in which personal power is not subject to any official regulation. Death Eaters wielded their wands to cast curses to maim and kill, while those on the side of Harry Potter used their wands to defend themselves and fight back. The lack of regulation allowed these wands to be drawn into the battle at a moment's notice. Every participant, regardless of age or experience, was trusted to wield their wand with responsibility. It was a grim reminder that without checks and balances, power is often left unchecked and can easily be abused. In the case of Severus Snape, a brilliant and morally complex character, the power of the wand became an instrument of both deception and protection. His ability to switch allegiances between the light and dark sides of the wizarding world was often aided by his mastery of wand use. Yet his character, known for its ambiguity, illustrated another concern with the lack of regulation: the ease with which someone with Snape's knowledge and skill could manipulate others without detection. No system was in place to track his actions and motivations, leaving him free to operate in the shadows, much like any other skilled wizard. The lack of accountability for wand usage is further evidenced by the way dark arts magic is often practiced in secret. Dark wizards, like Voldemort and his followers, use their wands to perform forbidden spells, creating havoc without the constraint of any checks. The Ministry of Magic, though aware of such activities, often struggles to stop the proliferation of dangerous wands and dark magic. The concept of wand regulation would have been a powerful deterrent against the rise of such dark forces, and the absence of such a system is one of the most troubling aspects of magical governance. Yet, there are those within the wizarding world who understand the implications of an unregulated system. The Order of the Phoenix, for example, is an organization that sought to protect the wizarding world from the abuse of magical power. Their members understood the importance of discipline and responsibility when it came to wielding magic, even if they did not have the institutional power to impose it. In this way, the Order serves as a counterpoint to the Ministry's inaction. It is an illustration that even in a world of magic, true responsibility and control cannot be left to personal choice alone. The question of whether magical weapons, particularly wands, should be more tightly regulated is one that has never been seriously addressed within the series. This issue reflects the larger theme of power in the wizarding world and the ways in which power can be both a force for good and evil. The Ministry of Magic, with its deeply ingrained bureaucracy, has failed to recognize the danger of unregulated magical power. Its oversight of wands, or lack thereof, underscores a fundamental flaw in the magical world as governance. Ultimately, the absence of wand regulation serves as a cautionary tale. The way in which Harry and his peers use their wands throughout the series, often without direct supervision or regulation, reflects the inherent danger of such unchecked power. In the hands of the wrong person, the wand is capable of causing unimaginable harm. And in the hands of the right person, it can be a tool of tremendous good. However, in both cases, the risk remains. There is no official system in place to ensure that the wielder is responsible enough to handle the responsibility that comes with it. Number 23. Dueling and lack of official rules. In the magical world of Harry Potter, duels between wizards are not only common, but often expected. From the duels at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry to the heated battles witnessed in the Ministry of Magic, magical dueling is an intrinsic part of wizarding culture. What is most curious, however, is the complete absence of a formal system regulating these magical encounters. While certain rules govern magic in general, such as the prohibition on the use of unforgivable curses and underage magic, there seems to be no overarching set of laws specifically designed to control dueling. This lack of regulation creates an intriguing paradox in the wizarding world. How can magic, which is capable of causing such destruction, be left to the whims of individuals without any real oversight? Take, for instance, the duel between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy in their second year. This duel takes place in the dead of night, in a deserted classroom with no witnesses or oversight. Both boys, with their wands drawn, engage in a high-stakes contest of magical prowess. There are no official permissions granted, no referees present to ensure the rules are followed, and no magical authorities ensuring that neither combatant exceeds the acceptable limits of force. The duel is impulsive, born of teenage rivalry and impulsive decisions, yet it is allowed to unfold without intervention. This episode highlights a critical flaw in the magical system, the absence of a regulatory body that governs duels, which could potentially prevent situations where wizards act recklessly or with malicious intent. This lack of regulation is not an isolated incident. When Professor Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort face off in the Ministry of Magic, the spectacle is witnessed by no one but the two combatants. But the aftermath of the duel is even more telling. The Ministry, in a desperate attempt to cover up the event, erases any trace of the battle. The Ministry's failure to provide a structure to deal with such confrontations is apparent. There is no official response, no public acknowledgement that such a duel took place in the first place. What is most shocking is the disregard for the safety of the wizarding world. The fight between Dumbledore and Voldemort could have had disastrous consequences for the magical community, yet there is no official body that intervenes to manage the situation. In this moment, the Ministry's disorganization is laid bare. There is no effective system for controlling these potentially catastrophic encounters. One might argue that dueling in the magical world is an informal tradition, often conducted for personal reasons or as a test of strength and skill. However, the lack of regulations around dueling goes beyond this. There is a complete absence of any formal institution that holds individuals accountable for the consequences of their actions during a duel. While there are numerous magical laws in place, such as the International Statute of Secrecy and the ban on the use of magic by underage witches and wizards, dueling is a different matter entirely. It is almost as if there is a tacit acceptance that duels will happen, that they are inevitable, and that they are somehow beyond the control of any governing authority. This speaks volumes about the magical society, its values and their assumptions about the limits of magical power. In fact, dueling seems to be regarded as a kind of rite of passage. At Hogwarts, students are taught to duel in a controlled environment, such as the annual dueling club, which provides a structure for these magical encounters. The club, run by Professor Lockhart in Harry Booksaul's second year, is supposed to teach students how to defend themselves and how to use their magic responsibly. However, even here, there is a lack of true oversight or accountability. While students are taught the basics of dueling, there is no instruction on the potential consequences of using magic recklessly, or on the limits of power during a duel. As Harry himself experiences, a duel can escalate quickly, with unforeseen and dangerous results. A student who lacks discipline or understanding of the severity of magic could easily cause harm, but there is no real system in place to prevent such a disaster. What makes this even more troubling is the fact that the magical world is home to some of the most dangerous spells imaginable. The unforgivable curses, for example, can be used in duels to kill or control an opponent, yet there is no specific regulation about their use in a formalized magical duel. The use of these spells is forbidden, of course, but the sheer fact that they exist as part of the magical arsenal shows how easily a duel can turn deadly if there is no formal structure to control what can and cannot be done. The absence of oversight means that duels are entirely at the mercy of the participants, who may choose to escalate matters as they see fit, regardless of the consequences. Consider also the duel between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort during the Triwizard Tournament, a scene that occurs in front of thousands of people. Despite the public nature of the event, the duel itself is still governed by no specific set of rules. The champions, Harry and Cedric Diggory, are placed in a life-or-death situation, yet no one ensures that the duel is fair, nor is there a formal adjudicator overseeing it. The danger of the event is palpable, with the potential for real harm, yet the magical community is once again left without a safety net. While the tournament has rules, these are focused primarily on the tasks themselves and not on the nature of the duel that occurs in the final task. In this case, as in others, the lack of a system governing duels is clear. Dueling is still seen as a private matter, something that individuals must handle themselves, even when lives are on the line. Perhaps the most alarming aspect of dueling in the Harry Potter universe is the complete absence of a specialized organization to regulate these events. There is no Ministry of Magic department dedicated to overseeing duels, no body that can ensure that wizards are not using excessive force or engaging in illegal activities during a magical confrontation. The Ministry's inability to manage dueling effectively suggests a failure of governance at the highest levels. After all, in a world where magic can cause death and destruction, it is incomprehensible that no formal mechanism exists to ensure that duels are conducted safely and within the bounds of the law. This oversight not only puts wizards and witches at risk, but it also perpetuates a system in which magical combat is unchecked and free from accountability. While the Ministry of Magic regulates various aspects of magical life, from the use of magical creatures to the regulation of dark magic, dueling is an area that remains untouched. This lack of regulation is puzzling, especially given the danger inherent in these encounters. The wizarding world is full of powerful, unpredictable magic, yet there is no structure in place to monitor duels or to ensure that participants adhere to any kind of moral or ethical guidelines during these magical battles. The result is a society where duels are, in essence, a lawless activity with no governing body to enforce rules or protect the public from the consequences of unchecked magical combat. In conclusion, the lack of regulation surrounding magical duels in the Harry Potter universe speaks to a deeper issue within the wizarding world. While the Ministry of Magic is quick to intervene in other matters, such as the use of dark magic or the regulation of magical creatures, it appears unwilling or unable to address the issue of dueling. The absence of any formal structure to govern these encounters highlights a dangerous gap in the magical system, one that allows for reckless behavior and the potential for catastrophic consequences. In a world where magic holds such power, it is remarkable that no one has taken the steps necessary to ensure that duels are conducted in a safe, controlled, and regulated manner. The wizarding world, for all its complexity, is ultimately a society where magic is powerful, but its regulation is curiously lax. Number 24. Emotion and will-altering spells. The Ministry of Magic, the central authority in the wizarding world, has an extensive set of regulations governing various magical practices. The laws concerning the use of magic are stringent, especially when it comes to curses, jinxes, and charms that could harm others. Yet there is one crucial aspect that the Ministry has entirely failed to regulate: spells that affect the emotions and will of individuals. While wizards and witches are required to be cautious when it comes to spells that physically harm others, such as the unforgivable curses, there is no similar oversight for spells that manipulate a person's mental state, emotions, or decision-making. This absence of regulation creates a potential breeding ground for abuse, as such magic can easily be used to control, manipulate, or influence others without their knowledge or consent. Take, for example, the Imperious Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses. This curse is perhaps the most dangerous, as it not only manipulates the will of the person it is cast upon, but it also utterly controls them. The curse is so powerful that it removes the victim's ability to make any decisions for themselves, effectively turning them into a puppet. The impact on the victim is profound and in many cases irreversible. The Ministry has declared the Imperious Curse illegal, as it is an overt violation of one's free will. However, far less dangerous spells that influence the mind, such as the Geist quote 49 or quote 50, are not only legal, but they are also widely used without any real regulation. This discrepancy in how spells affecting the mind are treated is one of the most dangerous aspects of the magical world. Consider the charm of attraction, a spell used to increase the affection someone feels toward another person. Though often seen as harmless or even romantic, this charm holds the potential to cause significant emotional harm. Imagine a student using this spell on a teacher to ensure they receive a good grade, or a colleague casting it on their boss to secure a promotion. The impact on the victim is not physical, but the manipulation of their emotions can be just as destructive. The Ministry has no system in place to monitor or control the use of such spells, leaving it up to individual discretion. In the context of school life, this lack of regulation can lead to situations where students exert undue influence over their teachers. Professors, such as those at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, have to constantly be on guard against emotional manipulation by their students, with no official means to detect or prevent such occurrences. Another example of unregulated magic affecting the emotions is the calming charm, which is commonly used to calm anxious or upset individuals. On the surface, it seems like a harmless and helpful spell, but it can be used to suppress emotions without addressing the underlying issues. For example, a parent could use the spell on their child to keep them quiet or calm when they are distressed, preventing the child from expressing their true feelings. In such cases, the charm may help in the short term, but it could also inhibit emotional growth and self-expression, leaving the child unable to deal with their emotions in a healthy way. Similarly, an employer might use the spell on an employee to suppress any signs of dissent or unhappiness in the workplace. While the spell itself is not harmful, its misuse can have far-reaching consequences, as it allows the person casting it to control the emotional state of another without their knowledge. At Hogwarts, the calming charm is taught to students as a means to ease tension and provide comfort in stressful situations. However, students are never warned about the potential ethical implications of using such spells. Teachers, like Professor McGonagall, may teach the spell in the context of helping others, but they never discuss the darker side of using magic to manipulate emotions. There are no guidelines for students on when it is appropriate to use such spells and when it crosses into the territory of emotional control. In many ways, this mirrors the absence of oversight in the broader wizarding world, where such manipulations are largely unregulated, even though they can have a profound impact on the lives of those affected. The lack of regulation surrounding these types of magic is troubling, not only because of the potential for abuse, but also because it suggests a lack of awareness within the wizarding community about the ethical implications of magic. In the Muggle world, laws exist to protect individuals from psychological manipulation, and there are strict regulations surrounding the use of mind-altering substances such as drugs or therapy techniques that affect cognition. Yet in the wizarding world, no such systems exist to safeguard against the use of magic that affects the emotions and will of others. This absence of oversight creates a dangerous precedent, as wizards and witches are free to use their magic to manipulate others with little to no consequence. The question arises, why has the Ministry of Magic allowed such spells to remain unregulated? The answer lies in the inherent complexity of emotions and the subjective nature of mental states. Unlike physical harm, which is easier to define and quantify, emotional manipulation is more elusive and difficult to measure. It is also harder to prove that someone has been manipulated emotionally, as it is not always obvious when a person has been influenced by magic. As a result, the Ministry has chosen to turn a blind eye to the issue, preferring to focus its attention on more visible and immediate dangers such as dark magic and curses that cause physical harm. However, this oversight comes at a high cost, as the potential for emotional abuse is just as real, if not more so, than physical harm. An example of how this lack of regulation plays out in the real world can be seen in the case of Professor Snape, who was known for his emotionally manipulative behavior toward students at Hogwarts. Though Snape never used the Imperious Curse on his students, he often used his position of power to manipulate their emotions. He made students feel inferior, anxious, and afraid, using his authority to exert control over their emotional state. The emotional toll of his behavior was particularly evident in his interactions with Harry Potter. While Snape was not directly casting any spells to manipulate Harry's emotions, his actions and words had a profound effect on Harry's state of mind. Snape's behavior is an example of how a lack of regulation in the wizarding world can lead to the abuse of power and emotional manipulation, even without the use of spells. In conclusion, the lack of regulation surrounding spells that affect the emotions and will of individuals is one of the most significant oversights in the wizarding world. While the Ministry of Magic has implemented strict laws to protect against physical harm, it has failed to address the equally important issue of emotional manipulation. The use of spells like the Charm of Attraction and the Calming Charm may seem harmless on the surface, but they can be used to control, manipulate, and suppress the emotions of others. Without a system in place to regulate the use of such magic, there is a significant risk of abuse, particularly in situations where power dynamics are at play. The lack of oversight in this area leaves the wizarding world vulnerable to emotional manipulation, creating a dangerous environment where personal will and freedom are not always respected. Number 25. Muggle interference. In the wizarding world, the Ministry of Magic claims to uphold the security and safety of Muggles, non-magical people, by preventing magical interference with their lives. It insists that one of its primary duties is to protect Muggles from the dangers of wizarding powers. The laws of the Ministry are clear. Any magic used on a Muggle, whether intentionally or accidentally, must be regulated. In theory, this is to protect them from the unpredictable and potentially dangerous nature of magic. However, if we take a closer look at the lives of wizards, it becomes evident that this regulation is not as strict or comprehensive as it should be. One of the most glaring contradictions lies in the actions of wizards who, despite the Ministry's rules, engage with the Muggle world in ways that are both reckless and harmful. Arthur Weasley, a prominent figure in the wizarding community, is a perfect example of this. As a member of the Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, he is tasked with understanding Muggle inventions and objects. However, his fascination with Muggle technology leads him to not only collect but also enchant these objects, often without fully considering the consequences. He regularly uses magic on Muggle items in ways that can be seen as irresponsible. For instance, he uses magic to modify a Muggle car, turning it into a flying vehicle. While this may seem harmless, it is a direct violation of the rules regarding magical interference with Muggles, as it not only puts the Muggle world at risk of discovery, but also endangers the safety of those involved. Arthur Weasley's actions may seem whimsical to those familiar with his good nature, but they raise a deeper issue. How often does the Ministry turn a blind eye to magical interactions with Muggles that could have serious consequences? This question becomes even more pressing when considering the many other instances of wizards interacting with the Muggle world in ways that go unchecked. Take, for example, the various magical mishaps caused by wizards who intentionally or carelessly use spells on Muggles. The most worrying instances of magical interference involve the manipulation of Muggles' memories. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, we see an example of this when the Ministry erases the memories of Muggles who have witnessed magical events. This is done to ensure that the existence of magic remains hidden, but the process is deeply problematic. Erasing the memories of Muggles, particularly without their consent, is a form of invasion into their lives. This manipulation of memories is not always done with malice, but it reflects a dangerous disregard for Muggle autonomy. The Ministry may claim to protect Muggles, but in reality, it is regularly altering their perception of reality without their knowledge or permission. There are many instances where the Ministry's regulations on magical interference appear to be completely ignored. The Daily Prophet, a prominent wizarding newspaper, has reported several cases where magical mishaps have resulted in Muggles being harmed or put at risk. Yet these cases are rarely investigated and the Ministry rarely takes significant action. In fact, the Ministry seems far more concerned with maintaining the secrecy of the wizarding world than actually protecting the Muggles caught up in these incidents. The secrecy surrounding magical events has become more important than ensuring that the people of the Muggle world are shielded from the dangers of magic. While the Ministry enforces strict laws concerning magical use on Muggles, there is a distinct lack of oversight when it comes to ensuring that these laws are followed. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, we witness an example of this when Harry, or his aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, are treated poorly by magic users, including Harry himself. Harry is magical abilities, such as his ability to cause accidental magical accidents, often go unnoticed, and there is no one to ensure that he is properly trained in controlling his magic, which could prevent unintentional harm to Muggles. The lack of accountability for this kind of magic use speaks volumes about the Ministry's selective enforcement of its own rules. This issue extends beyond the Weasleys or Harry Potter. We can also look at the infamous example of Professor Severus Snape, whose treatment of Muggles is often far from compliant with the Ministry's standards. Snape, though a skilled wizard, holds little regard for Muggles, often expressing disdain for them. Now, this attitude is problematic in itself, but it is especially concerning when it is coupled with Snape's position as a professor at Hogwarts. If the Ministry were truly concerned about magical interference with Muggles, Snape's behavior should have been monitored and dealt with. Yet Snape's use of magic is largely unchallenged, even when it clearly crosses the line into mistreatment of Muggles. While the Ministry's regulations are designed to prevent Muggle harm, they seem to do little to enforce these laws when it comes to wizards who are openly and repeatedly engaging in harmful magical acts against Muggles. For example, consider the Malfoy family, who, like many other pure-blood families, hold strong anti-Muggle sentiments. A disdain for Muggles and Muggle-born wizards is well documented, but despite this, they are never held accountable for the harm they cause to Muggles. Draco Malfoy, in particular, is a prime example of a young wizard who, despite being raised in a family that openly disparages Muggles, is allowed to interact with the Muggle world without any consequences. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of the Ministry, its lax approach to magical interference with Muggles, is the impact it has on the victims of these encounters. Muggle families are often torn apart or left emotionally scarred by the magic they experience, but there is no system in place to protect them or to ensure that they are not further harmed. The most obvious example of this can be seen in the case of Harry, his own relatives, the Dursleys, whose lives are irrevocably altered by their connection to Harry and the magical world. While Harry's actions are rarely malicious, they often have a lasting impact on the Dursleys, and the Ministry never intervenes to address their mistreatment. It is not just magical objects or accidental magic that pose a threat to Muggles, it is also the attitudes of wizards themselves. The disdain many wizards have for Muggles makes it more likely that magic will be used recklessly. Whether intentionally or not, wizards who believe themselves to be superior to Muggles may treat them as lesser beings, often leading to exploitation, disrespect, and harm. The Ministry's failure to regulate this behavior is a glaring flaw in the magical world's supposed commitment to Muggle protection. Despite the Ministry's supposed commitment to Muggle safety, it is clear that much of this responsibility is left unaddressed. The lack of accountability for magical interference with Muggles raises serious questions about the true motives of the Ministry. While it claims to protect Muggles, its actions often suggest that the safety of Muggles is not its highest priority. Instead, the Ministry seems far more concerned with maintaining its own secrecy and power, allowing magical mishaps and injustices to occur without consequence. In a world where magic is commonplace and the potential for harm is vast, it is clear that the Ministry's approach to Muggle protection is deeply flawed. Number 26. Storage and destruction of dangerous artifacts. In the wizarding world, one of the most mysterious and unsettling aspects is the handling of dangerous magical artifacts. The Ministry of Magic, the central governing body of the magical community, appears to have little regulation or control over these objects, which range from cursed relics to items capable of immense destruction. These items, such as Tom Riddle's diary or the infamous locket of Salazar Slytherin, are not only powerful, but carry deep, dark histories that often go unnoticed until it is too late. The lack of an official system for tracking, storing, or destroying these dangerous artifacts seems almost incomprehensible, especially when one considers the immense danger they pose. Take, for example, the Diary of Tom Riddle. This seemingly innocuous object is nothing more than a vessel for the memory of Lord Voldemort himself. When Ginny Weasley finds it in her possession, she is unaware of the diary's dangerous nature. Over time, she is slowly manipulated and possessed by the memory of Riddle, an event that nearly causes the second opening of the Chamber of Secrets. The diary is later destroyed by Harry Potter, but it remains a lingering reminder of how these powerful artifacts can slip through the cracks, unnoticed and uncontrolled by the Ministry. One would assume that such a dangerous object, tied directly to the Dark Lord, would be kept under lock and key in a secure facility, but instead it was left to be discovered in a bookstore practically by chance. The diary is not an isolated case. Another artifact of great danger is the locket of Salazar Slytherin, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. The locket's journey through the hands of various owners highlights the Ministry's negligence regarding magical artifacts. The locket passes through several owners over decades, including the Gaunt family, then Tom Riddle himself, and eventually ends up in the possession of the Lestrange family. When the locket is discovered by Harry, Ron, and Hermione, it is buried in a cave protected by dark enchantments, left there to be found and destroyed only after great effort and danger. It's curious that the Ministry, whose task it is to protect the public from magical threats, never made any move to contain or secure such a powerful item, allowing it to slip through generations unnoticed. Perhaps the most alarming example of magical negligence, however, is the use of the Deathly Hallows. These three objects, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak, are some of the most powerful and dangerous artifacts in the wizarding world, and yet their origins are shrouded in myth. The Elder Wand, in particular, is infamous for its power to kill and its history of violence. The Invisibility Cloak, while less inherently harmful, offers its wearer the ability to disappear completely, making it a valuable tool for subterfuge and escape. Yet these items are never registered, never tracked, and remain free to fall into the wrong hands. While the story of the Deathly Hallows is largely a tale of the Peverell brothers and their ill-fated search for immortality, it also serves as a commentary on the Ministry's complete lack of regulation over such powerful magical objects. The wizarding world is living with these dangerous relics, passing them through generations, unobserved and unchecked by any sort of centralized magical authority. The Ministry's failure to regulate magical artifacts becomes evident when we consider how these objects continue to resurface, often in the hands of people with questionable intentions. The cursed opal necklace, for example, is another item that causes significant harm without any oversight from the Ministry. This dangerous necklace was originally owned by a wizard named Merop Gaunt, who gave it to Tom Riddle, where it was then passed through various hands before eventually coming into the possession of Bellatrix Lestrange. It is only after Bellatrix's use of the necklace that it is destroyed, when Katie Bell is cursed by it. This necklace, a seemingly insignificant object, nearly claimed lives and caused considerable harm, yet the Ministry did nothing to secure it or track its whereabouts. It's clear that dangerous, magical artifacts like this are allowed to pass from one person to another, unchecked and unregulated, until they cause harm. Another glaring example of the Ministry's negligence is their failure to contain and neutralize the Horcruxes, Voldemort's ultimate weapons. These objects containing pieces of the Dark Lord's soul are not only dangerous because of their ability to manipulate and control those around them, but also because they are virtually indestructible unless dealt with in very specific ways. The Ministry, which should have been on the lookout for such artifacts after Voldemort's rise to power, failed to track down these items. Instead, they were scattered throughout the wizarding world, often in plain sight, such as when Voldemort placed one of his Horcruxes in the Gaunt family shack. Even after Harry and his friends begin searching for the Horcruxes, many of these items remain hidden for years, only to be discovered through sheer luck and determination. The lack of a database or magical monitoring system for such items is another troubling issue. In a world where wizards and witches can perform magic to locate and control objects, the absence of a reliable system for monitoring dangerous magical artifacts is a serious flaw. Such a system could prevent the chaos and destruction caused by objects like the Diary of Tom Riddle or the Cursed Locket. Yet the Ministry does nothing to monitor these artifacts, allowing them to circulate freely, sometimes without even realizing they are dangerous. It's as though the Ministry operates on the belief that as long as no one is actively harmed, the threat can be ignored. This, however, only allows the problem to fester with potentially catastrophic consequences. The magical world's response to the existence of dangerous artifacts is fundamentally reactive, not proactive. It's as if the Ministry's policy is one of "don't fix it until it breaks." This mentality permeates the entire structure of magical governance, allowing dangerous objects to fall into the wrong hands, wreak havoc, and then be dealt with only after a crisis emerges. The Diary of Tom Riddle is just one example of how dangerous artifacts are left to be discovered only when something catastrophic happens. If the Ministry had a system in place for detecting and neutralizing these objects, much of the destruction caused by Voldemort's Horcruxes, cursed objects, and other magical artifacts might have been prevented. In many ways, this lack of regulation underscores a deeper issue in the magical community, a tendency to overlook or downplay dangers until they become unavoidable. It speaks to a broader failure within the Ministry of Magic to be proactive in its oversight of magical objects, which are often just as dangerous as magical creatures or dark spells. A proper system for tracking and destroying these objects would not only help prevent the damage they cause, but also protect the wizarding world from the powerful, malevolent forces that such objects can unleash. Ultimately, the world of Harry Potter is filled with magical objects that carry immense power and danger. Yet time and time again, these objects slip through the cracks of magical law and governance. Whether it's the Diary of Tom Riddle, the Cursed Locket, or the Deathly Hallows, the Ministry of Magic has consistently failed to establish a system for controlling and neutralizing these items. The consequences are clear: a magical world constantly teetering on the edge of disaster, where dangerous objects are left unchecked, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to pick them up. The question remains, will the ministry ever take responsibility for these artifacts, or will the magical community continue to live with the chaos they create? Number 27. Privacy violations through magical means. In the wizarding world, magic permeates every aspect of life, offering unparalleled advantages and possibilities. However, within the realm of magical law, there is one glaring omission: the regulation of magical privacy. Unlike the Muggle world, where privacy is protected through various laws and systems, the magical community remains largely unprotected against the violation of their personal space, thoughts, and actions. The Ministry of Magic, while highly structured and bureaucratic in many respects, has never taken the time to regulate the use of magical tools that can invade privacy. This lack of oversight leaves witches and wizards vulnerable to an unprecedented level of surveillance, all enabled by a range of magical instruments designed to listen, watch, and even manipulate minds. At the heart of this issue lies the magical tools that allow one to bypass the basic concepts of personal boundaries. Take, for example, the Mirror of Erised, which, although used primarily to reveal one's deepest desires, is, in essence, a window into the most private of thoughts and feelings. It shows not what is real, but what the heart most yearns for. This mirror holds the potential to exploit the innermost desires of any individual who gazes into it. Yet in the wizarding world, it is not governed by any magical laws or restrictions. Any wizard or witch could theoretically use the mirror to uncover someone's deepest secrets or desires without consent or knowledge. The Ministry of Magic, while highly concerned with the enforcement of laws governing the use of dark magic, has never once addressed the possibility of using such a tool to invade another's privacy. Another alarming tool is the Marauder map, an enchanted parchment that shows the whereabouts of every person within Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Its creators, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, designed the map not only to help them move through Hogwarts undetected, but also to keep track of everyone within the castle, making it a dangerous tool for anyone with malicious intent. The Marauder's map, when in the wrong hands, can be a form of surveillance that breaches the personal space of every student and staff member. No one is safe from its watchful eye, no matter how hidden they believe themselves to be. This type of surveillance is not confined to Hogwarts. There are magical items that allow wizards and witches to eavesdrop on conversations and read minds, something that seems almost impossible in the Muggle world. The Pensieve, for example, allows a wizard to view memories, and by extension, it could be used to access someone's most private thoughts, fears, and experiences. Though the Pensieve is most often used as a means of sharing memories, it could just as easily be used for espionage. If a dark wizard were to gain access to another's memories, they could expose secrets or blackmail individuals, making the Pensieve an incredibly powerful and dangerous tool. Furthermore, Rita Skeeter's enchanted quill, a tool that allows the journalist to listen in on conversations and write down what she pleases, exemplifies another example of how magical tools can infringe upon a person's privacy. Rita Skeeter, known for her sensationalist journalism, used her quill to obtain information from people without their knowledge. She had the ability to extract thoughts and words without a single person being aware that she was listening. Rita Skeeter's actions represent a dangerous precedent in a world where such magical tools are readily available and largely unregulated. If someone like her, who has no regard for privacy or ethics, can use these tools to manipulate and exploit others, what does that say about the security of magical society as a whole? These magical tools raise significant questions about the rights of witches and wizards when it comes to privacy. Despite the vast array of spells and charms that protect against curses, hexes, and other harmful magical influences, there is no equivalent set of laws or regulations protecting a witch or wizard as personal life. The ministry has put great effort into regulating other areas of magic, such as the use of love potions, dark magic, and the trade of dangerous magical creatures, but there is no comprehensive set of guidelines in place for something as fundamental as privacy. This gap in regulation leaves the wizarding community vulnerable to anyone with malicious intent and the means to exploit such magical instruments. One notable instance of this violation of privacy occurs when Harry Potter himself is subjected to the effects of Rita Skeeter's magical interference. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Rita Skeeter's quill allows her to write scandalous and misleading articles about Harry, misrepresenting his thoughts and actions. The magical quill is a perfect example of how a tool designed for writing can be turned into a weapon for personal gain. The fact that Rita Skeeter could manipulate the truth so easily without anyone being the wiser speaks to the severe lack of regulation around magical privacy. She was able to manipulate the perceptions of the public and harm Harry without ever being held accountable for the violation of his privacy. This example not only shows how the tools can be used to manipulate information, but it also exposes the broader problem that exists within the magical community, a problem of accountability. The use of magic for espionage and surveillance is a matter that also concerns the broader political structure of the wizarding world. In the Ministry of Magic, there are clear divisions of authority and control, but none that address the potentially devastating consequences of unregulated magical tools. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, for example, the Order itself is concerned with infiltrating the ministry and gathering intelligence, but no one ever stops to consider how easy it would be for a single individual to misuse these tools for personal or political advantage. A determined individual could use the marauder's map, the pensieve, or other enchanted objects to gain intelligence, undermine opponents, or manipulate situations to their advantage. The absence of laws regarding magical surveillance leaves the door wide open for these kinds of manipulations to occur, threatening the very stability of the wizarding world. In the hands of an unscrupulous individual, these magical tools can be devastating. They have the potential not only to violate privacy, but also to destroy lives. A magical spy, for instance, could follow someone's every move, uncover their deepest secrets, and use that knowledge as leverage. With so many tools available for surveillance, the danger is not just the violation of privacy, but the potential for blackmail, coercion, and manipulation. No wizard or witch is truly safe from the reach of someone with the right magical tools, which makes the absence of regulation all the more troubling. The concept of privacy in the traditional sense does not seem to exist in the magical world. The notion of private life seems almost foreign when one considers how freely some wizards and witches wield their power to see, listen, and manipulate the world around them. The lack of laws surrounding magical privacy exposes a critical vulnerability in the magical community, one that is rarely addressed. Until the Ministry of Magic takes the time to regulate the use of these tools and create laws that protect the privacy of individuals, the wizarding world remains open to exploitation, manipulation, and the violation of basic rights. In this world where secrets can be easily stolen, memories can be tampered with, and minds can be read, the need for a magical privacy law has never been more urgent. The existence of magical tools that can bypass the basic tenets of personal privacy presents a unique challenge, one that the Ministry has yet to confront head-on. Until this gap in magical regulation is addressed, the very essence of privacy, which is so essential to the well-being of every individual, remains under threat.